Stupid dog! You made me look bad!
If you grew up in the 2000s, pretty much anywhere in the world, the chances are that you would have seen this pink jittery dog ironically named Courage. Courage the Cowardly Dog, a paradoxical but apt title for a cartoon starring a dog who is frightened of pretty much everything under the sun. But the show, regardless of its strange genre, was a beloved cartoon to one and all. But the thing is that Courage the Cowardly Dog was a difficult cartoon to categorize, and the chances are that you probably only realized it after you stopped actively watching it. Do you remember watching this scene? Or even this one?
Return the slab, or suffer my curse.
Because I do. I remember how terrifying some of these scenes were. Scenes that were from a children's cartoon. But the reason why I find this strange after growing up is that although there were absolutely terrifying moments in this show, for some reason, I was allowed to watch this cartoon as young as a 5-year-old. But at the same time, I was not allowed to watch anything like an actual horror movie, which isn't to say that I was at any point looking forward to doing so when I was 5. But the point is that Courage the Cowardly Dog, in my opinion, slipped under the radar as a generic children's cartoon when it was a bit more than that. So the question is, was Courage the Cowardly Dog too scary for a cartoon? Of all the cartoons I watched in my childhood, Courage the Cowardly Dog has to be the strangest genre of cartoon I had watched. And the thing is, there is no other cartoon I could compare this to, at least not to my knowledge, which potentially makes it its own genre. And that is why it's hard to argue with the question, was Courage the Cowardly Dog too scary for a cartoon? Well, do you remember watching any other cartoon at the time which was remotely as scary as Courage? Well, if the lack of comparison isn't a telltale sign, then I don't know what is. But I think there's much more to this cartoon than that, because if it was too scary for a cartoon, then why the hell did I watch it, even when I was pretty scared of monsters at that time? Why did I enjoy this cartoon better than most cartoons at that time? Animation is a unique medium. It is much more versatile than live action, which makes it easier to push the boundaries of fiction. And because of this, things can take place in animation which you can't replicate in the real world, be it anime or Western animation. There's a lot of artistic freedom that makes things like this possible. And because it is animation, you don't question the rationality of it. When you see things stretch more than they should, or an expression that looks exaggerated to the 1000th degree, you don't question it, rather, you embrace it. But the immersion of animation is firmly tied to the type of genre it is portraying, meaning that there are certain genres that are much more expressive in animation than others, such as the action genre, which is known for the amount of creative control it offers to its storytellers. And other well-known genres like comedy or even fantasy are also widely focused in animation for this very fact. It offers a lot of freedom to be expressive. But what about horror? Before writing the script for this video, I casually wanted to know what the landscape of horror cartoons looked like. So naturally, I visited a fair few websites, and for some reason, I was quite underwhelmed by most of the cartoons that were on these lists. I felt like even some of the infamous ones like the Scooby-Doo series fell somewhere in between the mystery/fantasy genre more than a true horror genre. And if anything, out of all these cartoons, Courage the Cowardly Dog was the only cartoon that stuck out like a sore thumb. But why is that? I think the reason lies in the word horror. You see, the horror genre is not like every other genre. It might be easy to scare a few people here and there, but to perfect it, it takes a lot of care. Which is probably why most horror movies/TV series don't really live up to your expectations. And also why you feel like you already watched the best horror movies that are out there. But anyway, if you think that the live action genre of horror is difficult to perfect, just imagine the animated version of it. Sometimes I feel like it's almost impossible to scare me through animation. Now don't get me wrong, when an anime goes disturbingly deep into your inner psyche, undoubtedly it can do damage. But again, it would never hit the same as live action, mainly due to the fact that your brain can tell the difference between animation and live action from a mile away. So in simple words, it's hard to trick your brain into fearing something that doesn't look realistic, something that doesn't pose a threat to it. The reason why I had to invoke the functioning of the human brain was to talk about something that makes Courage the Cowardly Dog so unique. You see, Courage the Cowardly Dog perfected something 20 years ago the cartoons don't even dare to try these days. It perfected the comical horror of animation. And I feel like I would have to raise my hand here and say for a fact that there are plenty of anime out there which are unequivocally scarier than Courage. But that fear, had I grew up watching anime, which I didn't for the most part, I feel like it would have been a bit different, because as kids, our fear thresholds were pretty low, and as we grew, it obviously went up. And I feel like if I had watched an anime like Death Note when I was 5, it would have been a bit too much for my tiny brain. But obviously, the horror landscape of anime is something that I can appreciate now as an adult. But still, I feel like the term fear has evolved with me. And this is why when I look back upon Courage the Cowardly Dog, I appreciate this cartoon ever so much, because as a cartoon, it understood the genre of horror, and more often than not, it got it right. It is actually hard for a cartoon to understand horror, mainly because cartoons are not known for delving into the subtleties of fear, for it doesn't have to. Cartoons were made mainly for kids, and for the most part, they are still to this day. So typically, when you try to make animated horror, it tends to look ridiculous and goofy. And this is because your brain doesn't equate fear to animation as much as it does to live action. So how do you get around this handicap that exists in the realms of animation? How do you make animated horror scary? Well, the answer to this lies in one of the more infamous episodes from Courage the Cowardly Dog, the King Ramses Curse. I'm pretty sure you heard a lot of people talk about how scary this one episode was, which if anything is an understatement, because this was one of those scenes which to this day is talked about as the scariest scene in Cartoon Network history. And when you deconstruct this scene, you'll know why. The episode starts off as a normal Courage the Cowardly Dog episode, where they show us two thieves running away with a stolen artifact, with the cops hot on their tails. They try to hide the artifact beside the water pump near the farmhouse, but all of a sudden, the background music becomes eerie, and fog starts to roll in. And then we see the silhouette of a strange entity, ordering the thieves to return the stolen slab. Its voice so off-putting that it makes you feel the creeps. But in the scene, they don't really show what the entity actually looks like. From this scene, we can only make assumptions based on its voice, which is incredibly creepy. Then a bunch of stuff happens, and the day after, Courage finds the slab and takes it back to his house. And when Eustace realizes that the slab is worth $1 million, he keeps it to himself. But of course, Courage knows that something's off, and the next night, we get to this scene. And this is where we get to see this entity for the first time, and it shows exactly what made Courage the Cowardly Dog so good. In this scene, we see King Ramses, and immediately we know that there's something off with him. And the reason why you feel that is because King Ramses fits perfectly into what is referred to as the uncanny valley, a term coined by a Japanese roboticist named Masahiro Mori, which is often used to describe the relationship between the human-like appearance of a robot and the emotional response that it causes in people. In simple words, the more human-like you try to make a robot, the more uncomfortable people feel when they look at it. This is a term that's effectively used in the film industry as well, especially in the horror genre, to make something look extremely uncomfortable to look at. And this is the art that Courage the Cowardly Dog perfected, that no other cartoon even tried to. Courage the Cowardly Dog was the mayor of the uncanny valley. Now going back to this scene, there are many reasons why this character looks extremely strange. Cartoons don't really run on high budgets, and this was probably something that was created with an extremely generic 3D model, even for the time. But the funny thing is, that's what made it so scary. Here we have a two-dimensional scene that's completely hand-drawn. But when you incorporate a 3D object into this 2D world, and that too with very limited movement, they don't synchronize as much as our brain wants them to. Things don't quite add up. And this makes it difficult for your brain to process this information, which in turn triggers an uncomfortable response to it. It feels creepy. And wasn't this what Courage the Cowardly Dog was all about? Everyone knows what a werewolf looks like, so how about turning a werewolf into a weremole? Or how about a perfectly normal character who looks very much like a normal human but turns weirdly disturbing the more time you spend looking at his face? Or how about a floating head that looks like an actual human head? The list of creepy monsters in Courage the Cowardly Dog is endless. And that's because it understood how to take a children's cartoon and turn it into a genre of horror that was palatable for children without making them too afraid to not come back and watch the show ever again. And this is what comical horror is all about. It's not about turning a cartoon into an actual horror show, but rather, it's about balancing the horror with a touch of comedy to make it digestible for a younger audience. Courage the Cowardly Dog found the perfect blend between horror and comedy, and even while deconstructing its most terrifying episode, King Ramses' Curse, you can see this in action. One minute King Ramses strikes you as this eerie and disturbing character, and the next, well, he says this.
Oh, come on.
Which does reduce the fear factor just a bit. And this was the wholehearted truth about Courage the Cowardly Dog. It knew how to make you scared, but then at the same time, it also knew how to make you see the funny side of it. And in almost all episodes, it just functions as per this rule. But I think I would be doing a great disservice to this amazing cartoon if I only talk about how good it was at portraying comical horror. Because I genuinely think that there is much more to this show than what meets the eye. Behind all the horror and comedy, it told us a story about a sweet little dog who, despite being a coward, forced himself to show courage to protect his family from all sorts of monsters. And who could forget the final episode of Courage the Cowardly Dog, which could arguably be the single best episode of any cartoon ever made on Cartoon Network. In this episode, we get to see the real story of Courage, and things get very deep very fast. We see how Courage lost his real parents to an evil veterinarian and how he escaped from him and later on was found by Muriel as a lost puppy in a dumpster. And for surviving on his own as a stray puppy, Muriel names him Courage. And in the part 2 of the same episode, Courage is haunted by a figment of his imagination who wants him to stop screwing up things, who wants him to be perfect. But later on in the episode, after a bunch of weird encounters with strange beings, Courage realizes that it's okay to not be perfect, and it is his imperfections that make him who he is. This one masterpiece of an episode epitomizes the beauty of Courage the Cowardly Dog. Yes, Courage the Cowardly Dog was a children's cartoon, but it never shied away from scaring its audience. Sometimes it would go from 1 to 100 on the horror scale in a matter of seconds, and then it would break the tension with some light-hearted humor to bring the scale back to a 1. But at the end of the day, the core message was always the same. No matter what episode it was, Courage would always rise above his fear, and he would do anything to protect the people he cared for. And we only truly think about the contradictory nature of the title in the very last episode, and that's when you realize that this cowardly dog is named Courage for a reason.